It's Taj of the Beat.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by
Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher. This will be year 17 in the classroom for me, and this, of course, is All the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our world of education. Because we know, like you know, that education simply does not get the attention that it deserves. If you're tuning in for the first time on our YouTube channel, if you enjoy what you see, please think about hitting that subscribe button and that thumbs up so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. If you're listening to the podcast on the go, we appreciate you. Please take a moment when you can to rate us and review us. We're trying to get those reviews up so that we can hopefully pop up in more educators' feeds and suggested podcasts and all that. Jeff, did you know that we have very recently started to have our very first supporters and contributors to All of the Above?
I did know, Manuel. I believe those are people that have probably found us on Venmo at AOTA Show or on Cash App at AOTA Show, or maybe even gone to our Anchor page and subscribed there. Could it be any of those three possibilities?
It could be, Jeff. You know, we've been doing the show for a very, very long time, and we've been operating on basically a $0 budget. Everything's been coming out of pocket, our cameras and our hosting costs and all kinds of stuff. So we fully appreciate those of you who are contributing to the cause so that we could keep the show going and expand it and build it up. And we'll have more information for those of you who are considering supporting our show. We'll have more information about that as this episode goes on. But Jeff, also, I want to know, do you realize there are a lot of new eyes upon us for this episode and new listeners out there who are part of a nation, a too dope nation? Jeff, I want you to tell us about today's agenda and explain what that's all about.
Yeah, well, we want to officially welcome the Too Dope Nation to the All the Above Nation, emerging of benevolent, fantastic educators of justice universes, if you will. But today's guests are two incredible educators. We have Gerardo Muñoz, we have Kevin Adams, otherwise known as the Too Dope Teachers, who run, of course, the amazing Too Dope Teachers podcast coming out of Denver, Colorado. They're Denver public schools teachers. They are men of color in a profession where men of color are a rarity. And they have brought just an incredible sense of voice and interest to these important discussions about education and the importance of having educator voice in our public discourse. So, you know, it's funny, we kind of joke that like they're sort of like us, the mirror reflection on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. And we have them with us on today's episodes. We're going to get into some great discussions about, you know, kind of reflecting back on what happened this spring, looking ahead, and kind of continuing the fight for educational justice.
Dope. I cannot wait for that conversation. But of course, our show also brings listeners and viewers recent news and headlines in the world of education because it's hard to keep up. There's so much going on. So up next is our Do Now segment, where we will take a look at two recent headlines in our world of education. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks for watching All the Above. We love having you as a part of this conversation with us. Now, we work hard to bring you an unstandardized take on education every week, but of course, it takes resources to bring that to you. So, there are some new exciting ways that you can be a part of supporting All the Above and helping us continue to expand our audience. All you need to do is go to anchor.fm/AOTA. That's anchor.fm/AOTA. And you can sign up to subscribe to our show every month. Any bit you can give will help us help you.
Yeah, so we want to shout out our founding supporters on Anchor. Shout out to Megan, to Ricardo, to Rodney, to John, to Danny, to Eden, to Larry, to Mimi. Shout out to all of you. We very, very much appreciate your contributions. We love y'all. Thank you for the support. All right, folks, now it's time for today's Do Now. This is where we take a look at recent headlines in education. Jeff, how are we doing the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, it's my favorite way that we do nows, I have to say. I'm a little bit biased. But we have a lexicon. We're going to get into some key vocabulary, some key terms and concepts to help us ground today's discussion of juicy issues in education.
Okay, dope. Some nice summer learning. Let's get that
Exactly.
vocabulary going. Jeff, what's the
man.
first lexicon term for today?
All right, man. Well, today's first term is the term nah.
Nah or like nah?
That's an existential question right there.
It matters.
I think
It matters.
it's more of a nah.
Okay. Who's saying nah, Jeff?
Yeah, well, this story, of course, is brought to us by some good reporting from John Fensterwald at EdSource. And the folks who are saying nah are the California Teachers Association, which is the statewide union here in California. And with the return of distance learning looking more and more likely, regardless of how we return for the upcoming school year, the California Teachers Association, or CTA, has argued that school districts lack the authority to force teachers to do live online instruction or to record lessons for later use. Now, the CTA is pointing to a 1976 law that provides privacy protections for teachers. It prevents unauthorized recording in a classroom and requires a teacher's and principal's consent for the use of any listening or recording device in the classroom. The CTA is claiming that the law applies to distance learning, both asynchronous recording and live synchronous instruction. And that if a district wants to have that as the policy, they need the consent of every individual teacher and every individual principal in order to implement a district-wide remote instruction policy. Now, of course, the law coming from 1976, obviously has nothing to do with COVID and our current distance learning context. The law was originally written to prohibit students and adults from recording activities in a classroom without the teacher's permission, and said that such an intrusion, quote, disrupts and impairs the teaching process and discipline in the elementary and secondary schools, and such use is prohibited. Now, there's a lot of folks who are pushing back against this, and a quote by attorney Gregory Danis, who represents school districts, said there's really no basis for applying a law protecting teachers from the impact of unauthorized classroom recordings to distance learning in this context, and said, quote, in our present COVID-19 environment, one can hardly claim that synchronous video instruction as part of a distance learning teaching model is disruptive to teaching when it is the very method being used to teach. So, Manuel, our state teachers union is saying, nah, and some other folks are saying yes. So what do you think? What's your take here?
All right, so I think it's obvious that we have to have some live instruction. I think mostly everyone could agree at this point that some level of live instruction has to happen when we return to distance learning this fall, especially for the younger kids and especially in certain subjects like math, for example. However, I fully support the CTA using this law as a perhaps bargaining chip or negotiation strategy, because we are facing a time where teachers have always been underpaid and underappreciated, in my view. And now with distance learning being the reality in the midst of a pandemic, I think that so much is being expected of teachers without very much critical analysis of in totality what this all means. So teachers, of course, are dealing with the fact that many of them have their own children that might be learning from home. Many of them have their own personal family members and relatives and friends who have been affected by this pandemic and the economic crisis. There's looming budget cuts for sure, and teachers know that the future is very uncertain when it comes to our compensation and when it comes to just having a job. So to pile on new requirements without fully supporting teachers, I think is something that needs to be slowed down. So if the CTA is using this as a way to sort of slow down this rush to like full, expectation of teachers doing this and teachers doing that, then I fully support that. I am tired of teachers being treated like superheroes. And what I mean by that is teachers are treated like they are just supposed to go above and beyond and supposed to, just make magic out of a terrible situation. And in reality, we are professionals and we need to be treated like professionals. If there's going to be an expectation of live instruction or synchronous instruction, there needs to be training on that. I have not yet been trained on what a live lesson looks like, at least on what a good live lesson looks like. This whole summer could have been spent preparing teachers for the inevitability of returning to distance learning. Instead, we see all these plans out there for rushing back into the school building, and so much is being done without teacher input. It's just, to me, ridiculous. So if the CTA could use this as a way to put the brakes on new expectations being placed on teachers, I support that. I don't think the CTA is really like super passionate about this idea of not having any requirements for live instruction. I think the CTA and the good folks at all levels of the CTA know that some level of live instruction has to happen, but we can't just rush into these new expectations of teachers without having a real critical analysis of all the weight that's being placed on teachers' shoulders right now. So I fully support that. I wish I had gotten some summer training on how to run effective live lessons, but I have not. So to be required to do a live lesson and not be trained in it, like, we don't do that to other professions. So, I mean, what are we really doing here?
All right, so Manuel, I have a couple of takes on that. One, I'm really glad you spoke to the sort of superhero point about teachers, because all the time, teaching is one of those professions that, like, so infuriatingly is both like respected and also routinely disrespected, right? Like, people are like, oh, I love what you do. I could never do that. That's so noble and honorable. But then they don't want to pay taxes to, to fund schools, right? And pay teachers, a good professional wage. Folks vote against, things that actually support good public education, right? And then we heap on top of schools and teachers all of these massive, responsibilities to correct the ills of our ruthless capitalist society. So, period, end of sentence on that one. Thank you for making that point. I will say, though, I'm deeply bothered by the CTA's stance on this. And I think we're seeing in this moment a sense of national awakening right now around how certain types of unions do things that are just flagrantly against the public interest, right? And right now we're seeing that with police unions, right? Where police do, and of course the scale here is different, I will admit, right? But police push over an elderly man in Buffalo, New York, and then the whole department wants to protest when the officers who did that are, minimally punished, right? And so, and people say, well, what kind of ridiculous, entity behaves this way, right? And says its interest is squarely against the interest and welfare of the people. And I think this is a stance, frankly, where the teachers union is putting itself squarely against the interests of the people. And here's why I say that. The reality is, especially for younger students, there is no meaningful asynchronous learning that's taking place. For kindergartners, first graders, second graders, there's just such little actual learning that can happen for those students without live instruction, because they don't have enough independence and enough skill sets just developmentally to be able to navigate, the tools that we would, expect older students to be able to do with at least some measure of independence, right? So that's a huge swath of our most vulnerable students that we're just essentially writing off by saying we're not going to do this. Like, that's an unacceptable stance to take. And the reality is, for many of our older students, live instruction is incredibly important. Learning is a social process. Learning is not just, about reading something on a page and internalizing it, right? Like, people construct meaning through relationships and context building with other people. That's how human beings learn. We all know this because the very earliest examples we have of this with every human being on earth are like holding a child, and the child points at something, and we tell the child that thing has a name. It's called a tree, or it's called a car, or it's called a light, right? And we help them practice the meaning of that word, and we explore their curiosities with them together. That fundamentally doesn't change in terms of how people learn. They construct meaning with others. Live instruction is important because it creates the social context in which students can learn. Now, the issue you brought up at the end there about the lack of training, you're 100% right on that. It is shameful that states and districts have not done enough to put into place adequate plans, particularly this summer, to train teachers. We have summer school going on everywhere. My vote would be cancel summer school. We're not going to accomplish anything good with it anyways, and let's spend all that time and money actually preparing our teachers and our principals and our schools to function well in a distance or hybrid setting that we're going to be in this fall. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but this one got me a little. Yeah, man,
you were on that soapbox for a minute, man. It sounds like you really hate the unions, and I'm just so saddened by that, Jeff, because the union has done I mean, it's done a lot of good work for me in protecting my job, but I get it. The unions in general, but teacher unions for sure. There are a lot of problematic practices within the unions, but I think this is one where if live instruction was so important, then how come we are talking about putting a requirement on teachers before even talking about how to train teachers or prepare teachers for it? I mean, I want someone at the table, at the bargaining table, making sure that we are not just rushing into putting more onto the shoulders of teachers without really thinking about the just holistic, comprehensive impact of that on teachers. But, by the time someone listens to this episode, this will probably already be sorted out. Like, I don't think this is a stance that the union is super passionate about. So, we'll see, but got to hold on to something. Otherwise, next thing you know, teachers are just doing even more with even less in the middle of a pandemic, which is just ridiculous.
But Manuel, that's not the stance the union took. And I want to say, I know, I'm not an anti-union person, but I'm deeply frustrated with our unions in this moment in particular, because they're not saying, hey, here's what good education looks like. Here's what teachers need in order to be able to do that in this context. They're just saying, no, we're not doing this fundamental thing that is going to be necessary for a whole swath of students to really learn almost anything this fall, right? And to entrench some huge equity gaps, because what rich kids in the suburbs are getting, and then what poor kids are going to be getting in their schools across the state, man. So I hear you, but this was not the right stance, right? We needed a principal argument to be made, not just to no, we're not doing this.
I think there's a lot more to it than just, no, we're not doing this. I mean, I'm just looking at the bargaining matters updates from my district, or from my union, I should say. I see a lot of bullet points in there about what teachers need in order to be effective. So I think this is just one thing that is noteworthy, but I don't think it comes close to representing the holistic stance that the union, the CTA, has right now at this moment. But we could go on and on about the CTA and about live instruction and all of that. But we have another news story that we want to get to, Jeff. We have another lexicon term for today. And that term is peace out.
Deuces.
Deuces.
Yeah.
See ya. And that is what many school systems are saying to standardized tests. So this is a story that we picked up from the Washington Post by Valerie Strauss, who has done a lot of great reporting on education. And she basically laid out the different ways that standardized testing has started to fade away during this pandemic. Now, standardized testing, of course, was once a staple in American schooling, and it seems to be swiftly losing its prominence. This past spring, with the permission from the Education Department, K-12 school districts across the country did something that seemed impossible and unthinkable for the last 20 years, which is canceling the annual high-stakes standardized tests. And of course, these tests were canceled because of the COVID-19 crisis and the shift to distance learning and just all the messiness of the spring. But this de-escalation of testing seems to also be politically friendly. Of course, the current president, who shall not be named, he's never been a super loud advocate for standardized testing, and he's repeatedly said that his priority is looking at school choice and having alternatives to public school districts. And of course, Jeff, your pal Betsy, she hasn't been a strong testing proponent. She's more focused on school choice, so-called, and even the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden, he's seemed to distance himself from those pro-testing policies of the Obama administration. And even Georgia quote-unquote governor Kemp has said that, quote, current high-stakes testing regime is excessive. And he's promised to keep pushing an initiative in the state legislature to eliminate 4 of Georgia's 8 end-of-course exams. And of course, this isn't just something that's happening in K-12. We see many colleges moving towards having the SAT and the ACT as just optional. And back in May, the University of California system announced that it would phase out the SAT and the ACT testing requirements over several years. And some members of the Board of Regents have said that these tests not only aren't helpful in creating diverse student bodies, but that they're actually racist. All right, so we are looking at a wave of standardized tests being canceled or phased out. And even in Washington State, the Supreme Court recently decided to allow graduates from American Bar Associated accredited law schools who registered to take the bar exam. The Supreme Court has allowed them to go ahead and practice law without passing that test because of the impact that COVID has had on trying to even take the test. So, Jeff, is this the beginning of the end for our obsession with standardized testing?
No, it's not. I think it is a very important inflection point, right? It is a point where the sort of previously inconceivable has all of a sudden become, by necessity, just the way of doing things, right? Like, it would have been inconceivable a year ago to say we're just going to have no standardized high stakes testing across the country immediately, right? Someone would have thought you would have been crazy if you would have said that, even less than a year ago. If you had said that in February of this year, someone would have said you're crazy, you're smoking something, right? And now all of a sudden, the fact that we have been forced to change and the sky has not fallen and the world has not come to an end and children are still growing and, learning and moving through life, right? We realize that actually these institutions that we have put so much time, energy, and money into are not actually the lifeblood of school, right? And that was kind of, I think, how the public had been made to think of what education is and what education is about is sort of this testing industrial complex. And I think the reality is that's not what's important or not what's most important in school, right? The social experience, the connections and relationships, and the aspects of learning that are about passions and interests and development are actually the lifeblood of school, right? And so I think that truth, that essential truth, has become crystal clear to anyone who's not unbiased in the equation at this point. Also, I don't think the testing industrial complex has disappeared, right? These are major corporations with tons of resources who are definitely spending those resources to make sure that their industry does not collapse. So I think, they might lose some fights, but they're certainly not going to go down, without swinging. And on top of that, I also think it is very important that we do not make a rash decision about testing that has some very negative unintended consequences. So I certainly appreciate the critique of standardized testing that many people, including yourself, Manuel, offer on a regular basis. I also think people have not really grappled with the fact that standardized testing is a tool. Right? It can be used for good, it can be used for bad, but it is a tool, and it is a type of tool that exists for a particular set of reasons, right? One of those reasons is to help us measure student performance against a standard, right? Against a particular expectation of where students should be at a particular point in time. And I think on its face, anyone can realize that in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? If we want to say, by the end of third grade, you should be able to do these things, we need to know if you can do those things, right? That is, in effect, a standardized assessment, right? The other side of this is standardized assessments actually are instruments that help us uncover inequities and racism that's baked into our system. And so inasmuch as folks like to make the anti-racist argument about abolishing standardized testing, a lot of those arguments are being made with data sets that come from standardized testing, right? That actually tell us how big are the gaps that we're trying to address here, right? So I think we need to be really careful about not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. But it is a great inflection point. This is a real moment in time to say, the things we thought we couldn't live without, we actually can. And so what should we do now that we have the opportunity to kind of think from scratch?
Yeah, so peace out to standardized tests. I don't want to see them back, at least at the level that we've been doing them. I hear you on all those points about standardized tests being a way to measure students' progress against a standard, but there's just too much. For one, I don't think so. The arguments that you pointed to about getting rid of standardized testing and abolishing that system, yeah, a lot of those arguments do point to data from standardized tests. But I think even without that data, we would know that there's truth to this idea that measuring students against these standards and being focused on this test and punishing schools and holding them so-called accountable for their performance on these tests, that's all sorts of problematic. Like, I don't think we even need these tests here to say that our school system is not doing right by our most marginalized students, particularly our Black and brown students and indigenous populations. And I don't want to see them back. I don't want to see a return to so-called normal. We had heavy standardized testing for 20 years, and we had standardized testing even before that. And I can't say that we have made huge gains with how we school our most marginalized students. And we have many schools out there, lily white suburban schools, that have through the roof test scores, and those students are not showing competence when it comes to basic things like racism in America. So, I think the standards themselves need to be rethought. I am fully in support of this idea of getting rid of all those old structures that I think haven't done well enough by our kids and considering something new. You yourself pointed to the idea of our mostly white schools and having some kind of way to hold them accountable for learning about race in America. Like, we could rethink all of this, and this is the moment to rethink all of that. So, I don't want to see standardized testing as we know it to come back. I don't want to see it back. I think we are surviving just fine without it, and a better world is possible if we just have the courage to let go of those things that we feel are just so familiar and so essential to education. But yeah that's my take.
I love that last statement you said there, Manuel, about a better world is possible, because that to me is where I think there's a lot of synergy between what we're saying. I'm not saying go back to what we were doing before. I'm saying standardized tests are tools. They're really important tools that we need to understand things about our society, this deeply racist, inequitable society that we live in. If we throw out the tools, we are going to be cutting ourselves off at the knees in a lot of the equity-driven work we want to do. That doesn't mean we go back and do exactly what we did before. I'm 100% with you on that.
New tools, Jeff. We're not getting rid of tools. We're getting rid of those tools.
And not just new tools, but how we use them, right? How you use the tool. In this case with testing, I think, is actually almost more important than which tool you are using.
All right. So unions and standardized testing, I believe we could go on and on and on about that. And I am confident in saying that our listeners or our viewers also have pretty strong opinions when it comes to the role of teachers' unions during this pandemic and standardized testing in the future of that. So definitely feel free to chime in. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop some comments below. If you are listening on the podcast, jump on any of our Facebook page or our Twitter channel at AOTA Show and let us know your thoughts about these topics so that we can keep this conversation going. All right. But up next, we have two very important guests. We have the two dope teachers in the building, and we are about to have a conversation with them about this fight for educational justice. All right. So that's in our seminar coming up next. Stay tuned. Folks, thank you for listening to All of the Above. If you appreciate what you're listening to or what you're watching, do consider becoming one of our supporters. If you head over to aotashow.com/support, you'll see a list of different ways that you can make a contribution so that you can help us expand the show and keep it moving. Those methods include Venmo and Cash App. Our Venmo is at AOTA Show, and our Cash App is $AOTA Show.
Yeah, so we want to give a big shout out to our founding contributors who have found us via Venmo, Cash App, on our website there. They are Genevieve, and Anna Marie. Thank you so much for your contributions to the All the Above Nation and family here. We really appreciate your support. And folks, again, you can join them. Help us bring you a great unstandardized take on education. It's at aotashow.com/support. Thank you. All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. We are very excited to have with us two incredible guests. One might even say two dope guests. We have the hosts of the Two Dope Teachers podcast coming straight out of Denver, Colorado. We have Gerardo Muñoz and Kevin Adams with us. Welcome, Gerardo and Kevin. It's great to have you here today. And yeah, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kevin and Gerardo. They're doing some great work on their show. We definitely want you to check it out. Kevin and Gerardo are Denver public school teachers who co-host the podcast Two Dope Teachers. They describe themselves as #unicorns, men of color who are classroom teachers, and most folks don't get us. Most systems in schools aren't set up for us. A lot of students are like us. We give voice to the voiceless every 2 weeks because, as Arundhati Roy argued, there is no such thing as the silent, only the silenced. They invite you to check out their podcast. It's available on Apple Podcast and on their website, which is mrmunoz.org, and take a walk on the dark side with them. Well, gentlemen, we both have had a chance to listen to your work. I feel like we are kindred spirits from afar, you know, on either side of the Rocky Mountains, keeping the flame of male educators of color, talking about interesting issues in education and helping to bring educator voice into the public discourse about our profession. So thanks for what you do, and we're excited to have you here on All the Above.
No, thanks for having us. This is an incredible opportunity to just connect. Like, you know, when we started the podcast in 2015, you know, a lot of what we realized we needed was a way for teachers of color to connect when frequently we are in isolated spaces. A lot of times we're the only one or one of maybe only a couple of staff of color on any given staff. And so just meeting up with y'all is just like, it's just affirmation of how special this space can be. So, you know, thank you for having us.
Yeah. Shout out, you know, and I agree with Gerardo. You know, it's like it's so wonderful to realize that there are other teachers, other unicorns out there, right?
Yeah.
Because like when you're going through life as a unicorn, and people are like, you don't exist. Unicorns don't exist, right?
I mean, we heard of them.
Kids draw unicorns and they think about unicorns, you know, all the time. But like when you're a unicorn and you find other unicorns, you're like, yes,
we exist.
We exist.
As our friend Jose Wilson, you know, says, you know, we out you, right?
Yeah, we are. We are.
We're here. Yeah. So yeah, 4 unicorns in one place. Yeah, this is incredible.
Look out, y'all.
We exist.
For sure. Dope. Well, all right. So it's summer break and y'all are two veteran educators, and I don't know how many years specifically you've been in the classroom, but I could be confident, I think, in saying that the 2019-2020 school year is one year that was unlike any other year that any of us have experienced, really. And now that it's summer break and we are at least, you know, about a month removed from the distance learning of the spring, I'm wondering if y'all could share with us maybe a little bit about how this school year has maybe taught you something different or helped you look at what you do and look at your practice differently, considering that, you know, you've had so many years of experience already, but this year was such a wild year. So what are some of your, I guess, takeaways from what we've experienced?
You know, I think probably the biggest takeaway is that, like, authenticity, the realness of like my practice, that like they're like, and I've always flirted with this idea, but I think I'm becoming more and more committed that there can't be a separation between my classroom and the rest of the world, right? It is like everything that happens, you know, and I think we are encouraged by districts and administrators to be like, we can only, and we even say this, I can control what happens in my four walls, right? But I think we have to, I've realized throughout this that I've got to let what's happening beyond those four walls really in and permeate my classroom, because it already is, right? It's already influencing all the interactions. And so, from COVID-19, the quarantine back in March to, today and the uprisings, I just see an urgency to just make everything as real and authentic for my students as possible, and I want to see us blur the lines of like what it means to be a teacher, what it means to be a student even more, because like, I think we've gotten to this place where we've crossed more into each other's homes, right? We're starting to realize more and more about the way people live, and I hope during the time of the uprising right now that, a lot of our white colleagues, are really taking serious and open to listening to the voices, right? Because it's easy to say, the police are racist and they're the problem, and that's where systematic racism lies. But, I think it's evident that, if we're in a school working, we are part of the problem too. We are just, systematic racism is just as much a part of our institution as it is the police department or any other institution out there. And so I think it's just critical for us to be authentic and address the issues that our kids are facing boldly and courageously.
That's so well said. And, I want to shout out Kevin, because he has persisted in a leadership role at our school. He's a teacher leader. It's one of the, kind of innovative ideas that we have here. You teach some classes, but you also do some coaching and evaluation. And, I think that he's just been kind of a rock in trying to, guide us through this process. And it's been really tough. Man, that question. I guess everything you said, Kev. But I guess for me, there's a couple of things that have really come up. The first thing is that tomorrow is not guaranteed, right? We left out on March 13th for an extended spring break. The district had said we're going to take 3 weeks off. We'll be back on April 7th, and and we'll just we'll kind of go from there. And so I think it didn't quite sink in because I've been teaching. To your point, Manuel, I've been teaching. This is my 21st year. So I've seen stuff, man. I've seen stuff. And, like there was the SARS scare, there's the foot and mouth scare. There was the scare of different, epidemics that never quite materialized as pandemics, at least not pandemics that impacted the US. So it's a part of me that was just kind of like, this is just going to be like SARS. It's going to be fine. We'll be back, do your reading, AP children, because we still have tests and all that kind of stuff. And then for a lot of those kids, I didn't see them again. Right. The access issues when it comes to remote learning, I think they've been really well publicized. The inequities, the digital inequities we have in our city are pretty pronounced. Is one of the most gentrified cities in the United States. You can really track engagement by zip code. And so that points at systemic things. So I think that for myself in my practice, not just with my students, but also with my colleagues, also with my family, I've had to engage it as if this is the last day I'm going to have with these people, right? Like if this is the last day, if I engage every student as if this is the last moment that I have with them, how different will that engagement be? Can I, to Kevin's point, be in that moment that kind of pushes these that interrogates these boundaries between, being a teacher and being a supportive mentor and being a coach and those kinds of things, and being able to respond to a need that's there. I've realized that normal wasn't good enough. It's not good enough. It never was. It never will be. And while I would like, I have an anxiety disorder, so I would like a little bit of predictability in my professional life. I would like to know, some things coming up. at the same time, I think we've got to poise ourselves for an opportunity to come to the table with a different conversation. I've been in my studies. I took a 20-mile run this morning. There's not much you can do on a 20-mile run except for listen to stuff. And so I listened. I think I finished the entire 1619 podcast, the whole thing, on this run. And it's just crystallizing so much. If you've listened to it, it's just like, it gives intellectual meaning to the phrase Black Lives Matter, because you can see literally if Black lives had mattered in 1619, then a lot of the oppressive systems that we have today wouldn't persist and wouldn't disproportionately impact our Black brothers and sisters. So I've learned that I'm hella annoying when you got to be around too much. That's why Kevin won't always park next to me in the lot or sit with
I wish I could park. I'm counting the days till I can park next to you in the lot.
Now it'll be like that. Now he won't avoid me at staff meetings because I always get him in trouble. But yeah, it's just been a really interesting thing. And then, where's our creative muscle? Like, where are we expressing ourselves creatively? Kevin's a musician. He wrote our intro music, and I think he's had that time to just mess with the guitar and put things together. And I'm experimenting a lot with just the things that I don't typically have time for, and just trying to like bring that kind of testimonial into this moment. But it's why we've had two straight wild years in DPS. Last year we were on strike.
Right.
We went on strike in February, and that was definitely a moment. And and I just remember saying at the beginning of this year, well, at least we won't be going on strike this year.
Yep.
It should be a normal year.
Should be pretty normal.
Yeah. I've learned I guess that's my last takeaway, is never say that.
Yes. Yeah. It was your fault. It was your fault.
I'm glad that's over. Now we can get back to normal. At least we won't have a global pandemic or anything. Definitely not going there.
Yeah, that so much of what you said resonates for me. I do my work primarily, at least in LAUSD, and we also had a major strike last year, and came into this year at least everything's going to be back to normal, and it was an even crazier year, right? So I am firmly in the camp of not counting my chickens before they hatch when it comes to school anymore, at least.
For sure.
But also, so much of what you both said, I think, struck a chord with me because, as educators, Manuel and I, I think a lot of the reason that all the above exists is wanting to step into the kind of public sphere of discussion about education with our voices and with the voices of educators, with the voices of educators of color, of male educators of color, in a space that is in too many ways, all white or primarily white, and in a profession where certainly right, and in a profession where certainly men are underrepresented overall, right? And so I think we're wondering about your own kind of bit of your story and how you made the decision to kind of step into that public space as well. And also, if you could talk a little bit about, the significance of this moment, because we have governors and state superintendents and whatnot, reinventing school or trying to figure out how to reinvent school as we speak. And the importance of educator voice in this moment is maybe greater than ever. So would love to hear your thoughts about that, gentlemen.
Yeah. I think going back to why the podcast started, or what inspired us to use our voices, is I think me and Gerardo were having these conversations after staff meetings consistently, and as a teacher of color, you go into these staff meetings and you hear things, when data is rolled out and people talking about students and just sharing their perspectives about causes and why things happen, and so you hear things like, well, how these kids are, or those kids don't really care. These kids don't really belong in our school, or, even worse comments about the students, but I think kind of you hear these comments and you kind of think about the people that that you've grown up with, the relationships that you have with these students. And you're like, no, I think it's something different. I talked to this kid and he's really good at this and he really knows this and he could do blah, 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 yada, yada. And me and Gerardo would have these conversations where it's like, did you hear that? Did that make sense to you? Are you thinking what I'm thinking? And like we'd come out and like, so we'd confirm each other's thinking. We'd be like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. I am thinking the right way. There's something wrong with them. And so I think we kind of spent time hashing those out, and we were listening to some other podcasts and we just began to talk. And I was like, we should.
What other podcasts? You got to tell them.
Denzel Washington is the greatest actor of all time, period.
That's the podcast.
That's the podcast that we were like obsessed with.
We would hijack like the first 10 minutes of a department meeting, talk about, hey, did you hear the episode? You hear what Kevin said? And then Kamal said this, and then it was like, and so yeah. So I mean, it was definitely like, the brothers were funny, but they were talking about really important issues of representation. And Denzel Washington's role in elevating Black actors and Black stories and that kind of thing. Sorry, I just had to have you like.
No, but no, you bring up a good point, right? Of this connection of the way they were talking about their profession, their craft. I think we were having the same conversations, as teachers of color, and I think as people of color are having, in various sectors of a variety of industries that are predominantly white, right? They're like, oh, we have these conversations. This is what it's like for us. We have to do this, And so we were like, well, let's start to put it out. Let's record it. Let's record these conversations. This could be a podcast. And so we started to record episodes and just you'd get responses from people and the more and more you just found that it was valuable to have your voice out there, right? As two teachers of color. And I think we found that there was people who were interested in hearing what we had to say, and it's that perspective that you talked about, Jeff, like this idea of, there are so many people talking about education and rarely is it our voice, rarely is it the voice of teachers. And rarely is it the voice of male teachers of color. It tends to be politicians and people who are very removed from schools talking about education, And so I think what we offered is like we were there every day. We're doing it. Like most of our podcast is about things that like happened that day. And I think it's stuff that people can relate to. People can go through the microaggressions that we experience is the highs that we see our kids accomplish, right? The risks that we watch them take and the risks that we take as educators and working with our colleagues to really discuss issues of race, class, and privilege as they play out in our classrooms.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the really, I don't know why this moment stands out for me the most, but the moment that kind of stood out for me the most was when we were contacted by our statewide union. One of their organizers reached out to us and said, we listen to your stuff religiously. When there's a new episode, it's like playing in the office and we love it and we want to meet and talk with you. So Colorado Education Association has played a really big role in boosting what we've done. And I think I think Kevin hinted at this. I'm always surprised when like people care what I have to say about things. Like I've joked that my memoir is probably going to be called, "Hey, wait, I wasn't finished yet," or "Hey, wait, no, I got more to say." Things y'all don't care about, right? And so I think that was a piece that was really interesting for us to see the listenership that we developed, and that's just been really humbling. And people who recognize our voices when we go places, it's wild. Like never thought that we're going to be doing this. I think for me too, the value of having Kev as a partner on this and as like a partner and friend in my school building is that white supremacy is insidious and it is infectious, right? It is contagious. You can catch white supremacy. Yep. I spent the first 10 years of my career, recovering from white supremacy. And, as it turns out, it's like the H1N1 flu. There's no cure. There's no vaccine. There's no there is treatment, right? And so what you find yourself getting pulled towards is some of the dehumanizing conversations that occur between teachers about students.
Yep.
Even like, I've never even been comfortable with people making fun of students, behind their backs. Like, it's just not something that feels humanizing to me. I'm totally okay making fun of my coworkers, but and you start sort of, that gets into your head. And then, to Kevin's point, you get to a point where, as a person of color, even an intellectual like person of color, you question whether your insights on a student are correct, because as the writer Tamim Ansari once wrote, this was the guy who wrote Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes, one of my favorite books that I've ever read. He's Afghan American, and he was writing, he had served on a textbook adoption committee, he was authoring a textbook in Texas, and he was the only person of color on the entire panel. And he said, my opinion was such the minority that it was indistinguishable from error. And that was where I was when I met Kevin, where it was kind of like, none of this stuff that I think is true. Like, I studied ethnic studies and history in college. I came out of college feeling like I really knew this stuff. And it just took a couple of years of teaching to completely like cause insecurity and uncertainty in my own beliefs that I'd worked hard to arrive at. And so if you are not careful, and if you don't have, kindred spirits like my three fellow unicorns here, you find yourself playing into these white supremacist notions that infect the educational system. And so, and the process of decolonizing is a lifelong process, right? But that's probably the thing that has been most beneficial for me, is that I constantly get to check myself. I constantly get to say, no, you're right. No, you're right. No, this is true. And to the credit of our school, we've got some people on staff who are really, they're good white folk, right? I had offered an insight to a white teacher who said, you know what, actually, I never thought of it that way. Thank you for giving me that new way to look at it. And that was just validation. I was like, okay, wait, I have more. I got more. You want to hear more what I got to say? I can tell you more things.
Yeah.
I tend to go overboard like Jay-Z. So
yeah, and I think those are like really important points, Gerardo. And like, I think about this in the context of today and how education is being revamped, like going back to the question, and these politicians and all these people talking about, what's working, and, how easy it is for us as teachers, if you don't have like a core philosophical perspective on it, to buy into some of this stuff, as to why kids didn't engage in remote learning, right? To maybe, they don't care about it, right? Or, it's about this situation or that situation. Speak to the people, find out what their needs are, and I think this goes back to my original point. It's like, how do we get this community schooling where it's all of us together building a school, then top down, then them saying, here's what you get, And so like, as schools kind of plan on how do we reopen, or what does school look like, what's the future of schooling, I think it has to be a conversation that's not in a room. It's not isolated to school board members. It's not isolated to school administrators. It is a conversation that involves all community members, right? And I think it has to be led by the people who are the experts. And I think the experts in schools, the people who know the most about education, right at any particular moment, any day and time, are students. Because they spend the most time in a classroom. So they can tell you what they like and what they don't like. And then I think the other group of people that can tell you about what works in education are teachers, right? Because we also are spending our time in the classroom. And so I hope that the politicians are listening to the teachers, listening to the students, listening to the families and communities, because I do think like we've tried to build this school in a way that's like meeting these ideals that aren't related to anybody who is really involved in the system, right? It's like what's going to benefit the Chamber of Commerce, right? What do the kids need to know to become hard workers?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing that we've discovered about our work on this podcast, as we've continued as practitioners. We've kind of seen our identities morph into the identities of public intellectuals, right? This is what Henry Giroux writes about when he talks about the ways that educators can educate for liberation is to be that support for communities who need clarification on things. What's going on? How do my taxes work? How does this thing work? What do you think about what's going on in the school board in these things? And so, I think that's been a piece that's been really interesting. And as our listenership developed, students and parents and school leaders found our work, to the point where, we've had board members who have, as part of their election campaign, wanted to come on the show. When our superintendent was a candidate to become superintendent, she, reached out and said, hey, would love to sit down with you guys and talk a little bit about what's going on. And then we have students as young as like 6th and 7th grade who are like, we heard your show. Mm-hmm. And they get so excited. And so, it kind of thinks about that traditional fourth wall that sometimes exists between, the teacher's identity and the students. We keep that stuff quiet. We don't tell anybody about them, and kids don't even know my age and like that kind of thing. I feel like breaking down that wall is critical in this new era because, it isn't you guys need to do better. It's we need to do better. It's like, how are you going to do well on that test? How are we going to be successful in this unit? And excuse me. And if things don't go well, it's like, man, we were not successful on that last thing. So how can we put this back together? I think these are conversations I've always had with my students because, low-key, I didn't come out of a traditional, teacher prep program. I was an alternative license that, was dragged out of a coffee shop and into a classroom. And so for me, I'm kind of like, I'm just going to ask the students and I'm going to be nice to them. And, I think that's kind of like, that's where I'm at. And then along the way,
revolutionary ideas.
It's just it's like, I'm going to be kind to people because I have power over them. And I'm just like, I don't know anything about, like my mom is a retired teacher, but very different teacher than I was, or than I am.
Yeah.
But, I think that's kind of the foundation of it all. It's like, all right, well, let's keep on engaging, all of the quote unquote shareholders in what's going on in our schools. So it's just been a really interesting and humbling experience. Like we have the amazing opportunity to co-host a keynote speaker for the NEA's Racial and Social Justice Summit this summer. I don't think we're allowed to say who yet. But it's, these opportunities that keep coming to us. And we just think that it has a lot to do with, there's a conversation, that we are aspiring to be a part of, that you are a part of, that I think people want that conversation.
No surprise, y'all have been dropping a ton of knowledge in terms of the importance of that educator voice, especially educators of color, and especially in a world where you have policymakers and politicians thinking that they know what's best, when really, to your point, like it's students first that know what's best. We got to talk to them about their distance learning, for example, experience and what works for them. And at the same time, being an educator of color in the system, I mean, the institution is built on this, white supremacist, like oppressive framework, and being in the system can be really, really like enraging. I know for me as a teacher of color, like, there's so much about my experience that I'm just like, how much is what I'm doing right by the students, and how much of it is me just, being part of this system and, putting a face to the system. And especially at this at this moment in time, given the summer uprising and given the pandemic and all of that, I think that it could be especially maddening being a educator of color and seeing how these things impact our most marginalized populations. And one thing that I appreciate about y'all's show is that like you go hard for students who are so often just deemed to be like in need of being fixed and in need of like, being taught how to speak right and how to write correctly and get with the program. And y'all go hard for those students. And I'm wondering, as educators of color, especially going into another school year, and we don't know what the future holds in terms of from distance learning to who knows what the the election season and the continued uprising is going to bring to us. I'm wondering, how do y'all maintain your sanity, like for lack of a better word? Like how do you deal with the dynamic of trying to do what's best for your students and for yourself, and then also dealing with just the onslaught of everything from microaggressions to straight up in your face white supremacist thought about what students need to be doing right now?
Yeah.
I think
a great question.
I think there's not great evidence that we've maintained our sanity, but if you think so, go ahead, Kev.
No, I mean, I love that question, because it really does come down to it. But I think, it's what we're all dealing with as people of color in a white supremacist society all the time. And I try to think back, did I ever live my life in a way where I wasn't constantly asking those questions? And I guess it was when I'm around like all Black people, right? Like when I'm around my people, those questions are like, how are they going to react if I say this or if I do this or, whatever. But, thinking about how do I maintain my sanity, Gerardo, being able to come to him and vent, on those days, being there to listen to him vent, us venting together about stuff. Sometimes it's just like, it's one of the things I missed, going into his room, 8th period on a Friday, we both had planned, and just being able to like, we should be working right now, but we are going to just talk for like an hour. And it was just pure conversation, about like whatever is going on in life. But that's how I try to do it. But also like maintaining my own humanity, taking time to do the things for me. Gerardo mentioned these creative endeavors. I love it. Playing the guitar, writing, whatever, exercising. But those little things that I think remind us of our humanity. My principal, our new principal, is a yoga teacher, like a master yoga instructor.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Yeah, no, she's like a master yoga instructor. And she's like tied it into our meetings. Like, so we had a yoga break. And so look forward to that, man. It's dope, right? Dope. I'm like, this is great stuff. But I think like tying our passion to the work makes me be able to get through it, and as far as the microaggressions and the white supremacy, I think that's just day to day, I think that's what we're all dealing with as teachers. And so you just keep pushing through, and you find ways. And I think me and Gerardo were talking to someone else about like some young teachers about like finding your crew. And you gotta, and your crew might be small, but those are the people who have your back, who you can close the door and you can cuss about people, who can close the door and cry, who you can close the door and they're like, yo, I got you. It's no judgment. I don't see you as any weaker, or I see you as strong, because I think as teachers of color, and particularly men, and you guys can probably relate to this, like, I don't want to, nobody should ever see me cry, and that's part of like this toxic masculinity that I've been raised with, but it's also something that's protected me throughout, and so going back to my students, what do they have and why do I bet, because I was them, and people try to get rid of this stuff. And like, I've always believed like these are the elements that have made me thrive, right? This is what made me successful. This is what distinguishes me from other folks. And so like with that realization, it's like, I got to make sure my students understand and that I never extinguish that flame within them. I only fan it and make it brighter. Right.
I mean, I agree that question is, it's deep, and it's so important to kind of think about, because I think, I made a joke about, my own sort of levels of sanity through this whole process. And I don't mean to make light of it. I have had to do a lot of, important soul searching in terms of how I've addressed issues of toxic masculinity in my own life, and how I've addressed issues of mental health in my life, and those kinds of things that are pretty, significant. I'm not even sure I know how to cry anymore. Like that, it's just like, that's just kind of the world that we kind of go through. I have two guiding kind of philosophies that sort of I always try to come back to, especially when things are so unpredictable. Like the very things that keep me coming back to this job aren't guaranteed. The face-to-face engagement with students is not guaranteed. The working towards meaningful change and seeing the results of our labor, when I say our labor, ourselves as teachers and our students, and how we work together and like grow in confidence and discover new ideas, both from outside sources and within ourselves. Those are all things that I can no longer depend on right now. Like, one of the hardest things about remote learning in Denver public schools was that I just, like, all the kids would leave their cameras off, and I'm not going to yell at them for having their cameras on. I don't know what their surroundings are like, and I don't know how they feel about their surroundings and how they feel about their appearances. And I know it caught, I have a 15-year-old daughter who, there's a lot of anxiety about engaging your peer, like seeing your peers and seeing where they live and seeing who's there. My sixth graders were less worried about that. Like I was meeting their pets and like, seeing the goofy games that they were creating and all that kind of stuff. But when you don't have those things that create that wonderful intellectual and spiritual ecosystem that is a classroom, you have to like search deeper for the things that matter to you. And so, like, for me, there's that great saying, I'm not an industry artist, I'm an artist in the industry, right? And so, we recognize that there is a system of public education that functions in this country, and it has roots, and it has structures, and it has purposes, and it has assumptions. And so we have to be on guard against the way those assumptions will, kind of seep into our being. And then I also have this kind of burn it down attitude where it's just kind of like, everything that I'm doing is for the eventual abolition of education as we know it, of schooling as we know it, I should say.
Yep.
And so what are the opportunities for disruption that are in front of me today? And where can we empower young people to feel like they can be a disruptive force in this in this white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal system of education and schooling? And then the last thing I think, that's always my North Star. It's always like, this is a system that systemically has not served communities of color in any positive way, historically speaking, in the big picture. Now, all of us represent some level of educational success, right? I was a little bit of a problem as a middle school kid, but I think that I think that we've all on the balance been successful in education. We got to check that, right? And so, like, looking at the things that are toxic for our students and just facing those on a daily basis is really important. And then you mentioned, like, so we have our little crew that we call the Pedagogical Terror Squad.
Nice.
And, and we have a group chat, and, it's five of us, or four of us. Yeah, it's four of us.
Yep, 4 of us.
It's four of us, fellas who, it's 2 deans of culture and then the 2 of us. And, some of us while out on that group chat, but it's, we were sharing songs of encouragement with each other during the last quarter of the year. And then one of the guys screenshotted this article about, the 2009 Boston Celtics and how they still have a group chat that they maintain. Like nowadays, we all watch basketball together. Like Kevin and I are huge Nuggets fans. And so we hope that doesn't ruin anything over there on your coast.
All good over here.
So, I think it is about finding your North Star and finding who you are in this work. And really just, what did Talib Kweli say? Like, make sure your crew is as tight as you, because when they start falling out, they're going to take you down too.
That's right.
So finding that cruise is really important. And I feel like even though we're not even in the same time zone, I feel like this is a crew right here, right? Like this is a place where we can connect and support each other because we just need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of want to name one thing though, for myself. So, Manuel, you asked about the microaggressions, and I have to say that, as a person who is not Black, I get spared a lot of those microaggressions. And so for me, it's more of like the empathy that I feel and like how I step in when I see these things happen, because they're almost never directed at me. Like the types of microaggressions I get are like, wow, your English is so good. Yeah. And it's kind of like, well, I should hope so. It's my first language, and, but I think that there's a really insidious anti-Blackness that's happening in all corners of our society right now. And as a person who is not directly being attacked by those dynamics, I think it's even more important that I remain conscious and like name things, but also recognize that I have the privilege of not necessarily experiencing the same thing that any of you are experiencing, right? And so I think that's something for me personally that I think is important to name, that, it happens, but some of the things that I think that Kevin could say, would be much more significant than what I've kind of experienced.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's, I think it's safe to say that for that question of how you maintain your sanity, I think it's safe to say there's a lot of folks out there, whose names you might not even know, who go to your show as their like assurance that they're not looking at things wrong. Like this is like the injustices they see play out on a day-to-day in their schoolhouse or whatever state, whatever city they might be working in. Like, they see that and they question themselves, and then they go to your show and they realize like, no, I'm not the one who's looking at this wrong. Like this is like, so even though, y'all didn't say it, I think that's a big part of the answer for a lot of folks is going to shows like yours in particular, and realizing like, no, there's a lot of problems that we need to address, and a lot of problems and a lot of systems that we need to dismantle if we're really going to do right by the kids. Because, I really think about, the point of like having a crew, and, I have my little crew in my high school where I teach, and, we close the doors and we have honest discussions about things that happen. And there's so many things that it seems like we're the only ones that see it.
Yep.
And I think about what about those teachers who, especially teachers of color, who might be maybe the only teacher of color at their school, whether it be a elementary school in some rural area or a big public high school somewhere.
Kevin, that reminds me of Robert, right? The dude from Springs who we met. This was a guy, 30-year veteran, Black man, had always, every single year of his career, been the only Black teacher and the only teacher of color. The first time he met us, he's like, I've been waiting for y'all, And so, so to your point, that's right. And it makes me think of another funny story. Kevin, remember when all 9 teachers of color at our school were at the same table at PD?
It was the greatest day ever.
Oh, man.
That was so good.
So there's like,
so good.
There's the 2 of us. We have 3 Colombian teachers who are here on work visas. And then there was a Jamaican sister who teaches math and who is no nonsense. Like she's incredible.
She's the greatest.
And so we're all at this table together. We were loud and people were just kind of like, what's going on over there? We're like, oh man, it spilled out. It spilled out.
Wow. They made seating charts after that, I'm sure. After that, they started sitting people by department or something.
They wish they had. I wish they would have made some seating charts.
I'd be like, no.
My favorite thing in a staff meeting is to show out like the students. That is like the greatest thing in the world, is to show out like the students at a staff meeting.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, and I think actually
You
credit
see, like people, they're like, I don't know how to react to that. And you're like, yeah, I know you don't. I know that's your biggest weakness is you don't know how to react to students.
And credit to our coworkers. Like after that, more of them actually wanted to be at that table.
Yeah,
so,
they were like,
maybe it was okay.
Wow. Well, gentlemen, that is a hilarious anecdote to end on, I think. And I also want to just mark this day in history because not only are there 4 unicorns on your screen at one time, folks out there in the All the Above audience, but also I believe this marks the very first time we had a quote from Talib Kweli's The Manifesto. That was like 1999-ish, if I remember
correctly. Show. It was on the Lyricist Lounge show.
Yeah, man, that's old school. And I got my Bronx map behind me right here, so I have a special appreciation for the Terror Squad, and much love to my people back in the Bronx.
I woke up, I was seeing the Terror Squad this morning, doing my little chores in the yard.
But gentlemen, in all seriousness, we want to thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate your work. Their podcast is Two Dope Teachers. That's TOO. Two Dope Teachers. You can find them on Twitter at Two Dope Teachers. You can find them on Apple Podcast and on their website, which is mrmunoz.org. You got to spell out the mrmunoz.org. Check it out. Some great work coming out of Denver, Colorado. Thanks, gentlemen, for being with us today. And folks, next up is today's Class Dismissed. Stay tuned.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
It was great, really enjoyable. Thank you, brothers.
All right, folks, now it's time for Class Dismissed, where we like to give shout outs to folks doing great things in the world of education. Jeff, what do we got for today?
Well, Manuel, we got a nice feel-good story today coming out of, the major district right here in our backyard, Los Angeles Unified School District. And of course, it's summertime, and what better thing could happen with kids over the summer than reading a good book? And, in these crazy times of COVID, the district has realized that, we suffered a bit in the spring in terms of learning and wanted to find a way to bring, both some summer learning opportunities and kind of the joy of discovery of books to young people. And thanks to a partnership with Snapchat, with Snap Inc. Founder and CEO, the district has partnered with Snapchat to bring what's called the A-List Book Club to all of the students across the district. That's more than 500,000 students who can access free books, can access videos with celebrities like Alicia Keys or Russell Westbrook talking about some of their favorite books in kind of short, easily digestible videos. And just a great way, I think, to invest in the community, help kids continue to kind of grow and stretch their minds over the summer while we figure out what school is going to look like in the fall. And if folks locally want to learn more about the program, you can actually go to the website, which is achieve.lausd.net/A-List Book Club. So A-List Book Club, all one word there, to learn more.
Dope. And of course, we want folks to be lifelong learners. And your story, your shout out right there makes me think about No Name's Book Club, which is not just for kids, but for adults as well. And No Name is a rapper for those who aren't familiar. And she's super dope. And No Name's Book Club is a in-person and online community where each month 2 books by authors of color are highlighted. And it's a collective learning in critical theory and uplifting the voices of people of color. And No Name's Book Club raises funds to send the monthly book selections to correctional facilities across the country too, because we know too many folks who are incarcerated right now don't have access to critical learning materials. So it does that too. So shout out to No Name. I believe it's nonamebooks.com. We'll throw that link under this video and on our website as well. But keeping that learning going for the youths, but also for the adults. Super, super dope. So shout out to everybody involved in all of that. All right, folks, that brings us to the end of this episode. We hope you've appreciated what you've been watching or listening to. And if you take a moment to rate us and review us, we will very very much appreciated. And of course, all of our stuff, all of our previous episodes and content can be found at our website, aotashow.com. All right, we'll see you next time.